Southern Spain, the year 1086. On a plain near a town called Sagrajas, the most powerful Christian king in the peninsula, Alfonso VI of Castile, leads out his army, expecting to win. He is about to be routed. And the man who routs him didn't come from Europe. He came up out of the Sahara, a Berber commander from the desert of what is now Morocco, leading an empire most of Europe had never even heard of. And for the next century and a half, that empire and the one that followed it will rule the south of Spain, from Africa. Now spin forward 900 years. This summer, Morocco's footballers, the Atlas Lions, went deep into the World Cup again. And in 2030, Morocco will co-host the tournament itself, alongside Spain. Which is the perfect moment to remember something the history books mostly skip. Long before any of that, an empire from Morocco didn't just visit Europe, it ruled part of it. This is that story, and it runs in the direction nobody expects. To tell this properly, I need to introduce you to a people, the Amazigh. You might know the older name for them, the Berbers, the indigenous people of North Africa and the Sahara, there long before Arabs or Europeans ever arrived. And in the 11th century, one group of them, desert nomads called the Sanhaja, from deep in the Sahara, started a strict religious reform movement that grew into something enormous. They're called the Almoravids. They came from about the harshest place you can imagine, the desert edge where the Sahara fades into grassland, in the lands between the Senegal and Niger rivers. And from there, they built an empire that stretched at its height roughly 3,000 kilometers from top to bottom, from the edge of West Africa all the way up into Europe. Their great leader was a man named Yusuf ibn Tashfin. He helped found a brand new capital, a city you've definitely heard of, Marrakesh. He took control of Morocco and beyond. And then came the moment that changed two continents at once. Across the water, Muslim-ruled southern Spain, al-Andalus, was falling to pieces. It had split into a patchwork of small, squabbling kingdoms called tifas, and the Christian kingdoms of the north were pushing down into them, taking city after city. When Alfonso VI seized the great city of Toledo, the Muslim kings of Spain panicked, and they sent a desperate message across the sea to the desert emir. Come and help us. He came. In 1086, at Sagrajas, Yusuf ibn Tashfin met Alfonso's army and shattered it. The Christian advance, the Reconquista, was stopped in its tracks for a generation. And then Yusuf did the thing the Spanish kings had never bargained for. He looked at their weak, divided little kingdoms, and he kept them. Within a few years, the Desert Empire ruled Muslim Spain directly. For the first time in history, North Africa and Southern Europe were governed as one, from a capital in Morocco. So how does a movement that begins among desert nomads end up ruling across the sea? Faith was part of it. Fighting was part of it. But a huge part of it was gold. Here's something most people never learn about the medieval world. An enormous share of the gold in Europe and the Middle East came out of West Africa, from gold fields south of the Sahara. And to reach the Mediterranean, that gold had to cross the desert, along trade routes the Almoravids controlled at both ends. They held the door, and they grew fabulously rich holding it. They struck that gold into coins, dinars, and here's the detail I love. Their coins were so pure, so dependably full of good gold, that they became trusted money far beyond the empire's borders. Christian Spain didn't just use them, it copied them. A Spanish king minted his own gold coin as a straight imitation of the Almoravid dinar. And the Spanish word for that coin, the maravedí, is literally named after the Almoravids. Their coins have turned up as far away as an abbey in France and a shipwreck off the coast of England. Sit with that for a second. African gold, minted by a Berber empire, became one of the gold standards of medieval Europe, trusted from Morocco to England. The money of the age had an African name on it, which, as it happens, is close to where one of history's most stubborn myths comes from. If you learned about the Almoravids in school, you were probably taught this, that in 1076 they marched south and conquered the Empire of Ghana, the great West African gold kingdom, crushing it and forcing it to convert. It's in a lot of textbooks. It's told as plain fact. There's just one problem. Modern historians increasingly doubt it ever happened. In the 1980s, two scholars went back and combed through every source they could find, the Arab chronicles and the local oral histories carried down by West African griots. They gave their study a blunt title, The Conquest That Never Was, because that's what they found. No solid contemporary evidence that the Almoravids conquered Ghana at all. The earliest sources are vague. The story only grows more dramatic the later it gets told. And the local traditions don't remember an invasion. They remember drought, the wells failing, the land drying out as what really broke the old kingdom. Now, I want to be straight with you, because this one is still argued over. Some historians think there was real Almoravid pressure on Ghana, even if it wasn't a clean conquest. So the honest answer isn't a tidy, here's what happened. It's this. A claim you'll see printed as fact turns out, up close, to be shaky. And the neat version in the old textbooks is one serious historians no longer trust. That gap between the confident textbook and the messy evidence is exactly the kind of place this channel likes to stand. Back in Spain, meanwhile, the Almoravids didn't last. They were overthrown by an even stricter reform movement, this time out of the mountains of Morocco, the Almohads. Founded by a preacher named Ibn Tumart and built into an empire by his successor who took Marrakesh in 1147. The Almohads ruled that same enormous stretch, North Africa and Muslim Spain, from Marrakesh and from Seville. And this is the part you can still reach out and touch, because their buildings are still standing. If you've ever seen the great tower beside the cathedral in Seville, the Giralda, that was raised by this African empire as the minaret of their grand mosque. The Ketubiyya in Marrakesh is its close cousin, and their court in Marrakesh hosted one of the sharpest minds of the entire Middle Ages, Ibn Rushd, known in Europe as Averroes, whose work on Aristotle would go on to help reshape European philosophy itself. It couldn't hold forever. In 1212, a combined Christian army broke the Almohads at a battle called Lahnavas de Tolosa, and from there, the tide turned for good. Córdoba fell, then Seville. The long story of Muslim Spain moved into its final chapter. But for more than 150 years, the power had flowed the other way, from Africa into Europe. Now, some of you have had a question quietly building this whole time. Is this really African history? Isn't North Africa a bit separate? Arab? Mediterranean? Not really Africa? It's worth saying out loud because a lot of people think it and don't say it. And the honest answer is that the question itself has a history. For a long time, the map of Africa was quietly cut in two. The north filed away under the Mediterranean world, everything below the Sahara under Africa. A line drawn as much by outsiders as by anything real on the ground. But look at the story we just told. The Almoravids weren't some people perched on Africa's northern coast with their backs to the continent. They were Saharan nomads from the desert heart of Africa, with roots reaching down toward the Senegal and the Niger. They crossed the desert in both directions. They were African and Amazigh and Muslim and Mediterranean all at the same time. North Africa isn't the exception to African history. It's part of it. And this empire is one of the clearest proofs there is. So here's where we land. For a century and a half, an empire that began among desert nomads in the Sahara ruled the south of Spain. It halted a European reconquest. It minted the gold that Europe copied, and it raised towers you can still stand under today in Seville and in Marrakesh. The story we're used to runs one way, Europe reaching down into Africa. This one runs the other, African power reaching up into Europe and holding it for 6 generations. And there's a small, lovely rhyme at the end of it. In 2030, Morocco will co-host the World Cup, and one of its partners is Spain. 900 years ago, an empire from Morocco ruled part of Spain by the sword. This time, they're throwing the party together. History doesn't repeat, but every now and then, it winks. If you like the history that runs in the direction nobody taught you, this channel is where I dig it up. There's another video on screen to carry straight on. I'll see you there.